Да, чтобы он меня услышал, мне надо перейти к вам. У вас микрофон или он... В нашей конференции принимают участие докладчики из США, Болгарии, Уругвая и Италии. И вот сегодня на секции будет выступать уникальный специалист, в котором соединяется и он и философ, и психиатр, и невролог. Это для него такой междисциплинарный доклад, который позволит нам вот с разных сторон посмотреть на нейропсихологию, и в котором небольшая практическая часть. Часть мероприятий, конференции сознания. Do you hear us at all?
Yes, большое спасибо за приглашение.
Сегодня я хотел поговорить о нейропсихологии, я буду обсуждать тесты и оценки. Я попытаюсь проанализировать нейронауку и философию нейропсихологии, но буду говорить на английском языке.
Would you like me to start right away, or should we wait? How?
Right away.
Right, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. I'm not sure if you got the slides already. Perfect. Fantastic. All right, we can start right away. How much time do I have? About 15, 20 minutes?
Yeah, that's it. Can you turn the volume up?
Sorry, what was that?
Speak up.
Oh, sure. Yes, I'll be close to the microphone. How about that? Can you hear me well?
Yeah, much better.
Okay, good. So I'll be closer to the microphone. Wonderful. So today I would like to talk about neuropsychology, and I will talk about three main aspects: neurological basis, clinical evaluation, and overall assessments. So this lecture will be at the intersection between standard neuropsychology from a scientific biological standpoint, and we will talk about the theoretical underpinnings and the philosophy behind it. Perfect. So we can start with the first slide. In these two pictures, you see two evaluations, one which is mostly neurological. Here you see the brain scan on the bottom left. And then you see the Stroop test, which is one of the most common tests in neuropsychology. And it's a test that asks the person to pick and choose what this person sees on the screen. So the person needs to figure out a way to detect which color and or which word is shown. So for instance, the first word, top left, says blue, but the color of the word itself is red. And so this test assesses the ability of the person's brain to veto confounding information. If you ask me to focus on the color, my brain has to ignore what the word means, blue, and only see the color. Vice versa. If you want me to see the color only, my brain needs to avoid thinking too much about the word and only see what's in front of me. So in neuropsychology, as the name implies, we talk about evaluation, diagnosis, and treatment. But because there's an emphasis of the neuro part, there are three main areas of intervention. General brain injuries, for instance, TBI, traumatic brain injury, if a person has an accident. Then you have neurodegenerative or neurological diseases, for instance, Parkinson or Alzheimer. And then the last one is mental disorders. And we will see how a neuropsychological assessment can inform what type of judgment we have. So the problems are investigated, assessed, and tested using a variety of techniques. I would say that for the most part, there are two main categories of tests. One is more physiological response type of test, where you have a task to perform, and the other one is focused on questions, so questionnaires, surveys, and things like that. Next slide, please. All right, so what's the philosophical question at the basis of this? The validity of brain research as a fundamental cornerstone to understand human functioning. So the reason why we believe that neuropsychology works is predicated upon point A and point B. First question, if brains are similar, to what extent can we generalize from standard human brains or utilizing non-human brains, as in animal modeling, or computer-based interfaces, artificial intelligence and simulation? So can we make a judgment based on tests done on animals or on computers? That's the first question. The second question, to what extent the person can change, for instance, as a result of development or aging, but also as a result of stroke, dementia, etc., her emotions, cognition, and behavior, and still remain herself. In other words, point A, if we understand that the reaction to physiological pain is A, B, C, and we use rats as an example, can we infer that the same reaction is found in humans? Second question, what classify a person as such? Is the person still the same person if, let's say, the person loses memory, if the person is in a comatose state, if the person is losing the ability to understand oneself or others? We will see. Next slide, please. Wonderful. So this is the other big question. Can we say that the person's identity is equivalent to performance? Well, this is a working hypothesis, and that's how we approach things in neuropsychology, because the neuropsychological assessment is really a scientific process that attempts to assess a performance. So what happens is that you have standardized tests based on the general population. You calculate the response times and mechanisms in the general population, and then you classify those mechanisms in different areas. So attention, memory, language, executive function, intelligence, and perception, and many others. And then you see how much the person performs in each of these areas in comparison to the baseline. And we have batteries of tests, so series of tests that have been previously validated, and the interpretation of these results is both an art and a science. In other words, when you do a neuropsychological test, and I'll give you some example in the next few slides, you will see specific response numbers, and then you might say, okay, this person is faster, is slower than a person with the same education, socioeconomic background, gender, age, etc., etc. But then you need to interpret those results. Why is this person, let's say, slower in responding? Why is this person presenting some sort of, let's say, discrepancy between the way the person sees something and the way they react to it? So in this sense, Aristotle comes to help us, and his definition of science is very useful. Science as in episteme, phronesis, and techne. So you have the ability, or you should have the ability as a doctor, to understand the theoretical background, and not theoretical just in terms of epistemological background, but also in the sense of theoria, in the highest sense of philosophy. Then you need to understand how you relate that to the technology, the response mechanisms, and then of course phronesis, the prudence, to better understand how you should interpret this and account for other things. For instance, the mood in which the person is presenting. For instance, if you give a neuropsychological test to a person who was just, let's say, heartbroken, divorced, or maybe witnessed trauma, or maybe the person is just tired, did not have a really restful night, then you should expect the results to be somewhat skewed in one direction or the other. All right, next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so I'm giving you a few examples here. I want to make sure that we have enough time, so I will not analyze every single one of them. This is just an overall list. So we start with the CANTA, which is a Cambridge Neuropsychological Test Automated Battery, which is a series of tests. The Hallstatt-Reiten Neuropsychological Battery, and the third one is the Luria, Nebraska, or Luria, Yastaka, Nebraska Neuropsychological Battery, that assess all those areas that we just mentioned before. So we can continue, please. Next one, perfect. Few more, and I'll give you an example just of a few. I'll show you some example of the Stroop test and the Wisconsin card. So we have I will not mention every single one of it, but those are all standardized neuropsychological assessments. So as I said before, you have tasks and you have questionnaires. So for instance, you have tests that monitor visual processing, organization tests, such as the Hooper visual organization test. You have tests that focus on cognition and naming, like the Boston naming test. You have tests that monitors recognition and performance of pattern. For instance, the WCST, the Wisconsin card sorting test, is a test in which the person needs to show the ability to infer a deductive reasoning. You show 4 cards, and the cards test asks you to pick color or shape or number, and the person needs to learn the pattern and change accordingly based on the information. Then you have the Stroop word color test that we encounter in slide number 1. And then we'll see, I will leave the MMPI, the last one, the Minnesota, later on, because that has to do more, as it implies, with personality. So not just what the person is in terms of their performance, but what does it mean to be a person? Is personality something that can be changed, or is it innate? It's kind of the nature-nurture debate. And then you see on the left side of the screen that we calculate the curves. We have pretty straightforward biostatistical analysis, and based on this performance, you juxtapose the curve of the person's performance, and you compare that with the standard results in the general population, and you see, okay, this person performed better here, there's an outlier there, there are a few things that do not match there, and then you draw the statistical meaning of that. Perfect. Let's continue, please. All right, so this is an example. Now, let me just say a few things about this test specifically. So I would like to spend maybe 2 minutes on this test, just to give you a specific example so that this lecture is not just theoretical. So this is the Stroop test, or Stroop color word test. Now, earlier I showed you an image of what the test is about. So just to refresh our memory, you have words coloring different versions. So you might have a word that says green, but the word itself is painted in blue. Each letter is blue. And so the person needs to figure out a way to veto their reaction and focus on what the test asks the person to do. So should you focus on the word itself and read green, or should you focus on the color itself and say, I think I said blue in this case. And then once you do the test, you monitor reaction time, you monitor performance, and you have a statistical analysis with results. Now, the test is more complex than that, but for the sake of this lecture, I present you with 4 different histograms here. Now, you can see here 4 different areas. The first one is the word raw score, the ability of the person to pick on the word itself. The second one right here is the color raw score. And the reason why it says raw score, because in mathematics, we need to calculate the t-score based on that to infer the general population. But for now, we're just interested in seeing how this person performed. And this is just a standard patients. Of course, I will not share with you my own patients for privacy reasons. So first one, words raw score, second, color raw score, third, color word raw score. So you compare these two. And then, of course, we need to monitor the interference. If there is any interference on a brain level between the ability of the person to pick the word itself separate from the color, or the color separate from the word, and we calculate that. So an example in this specific case of this patient, you see in the interference scale, the very last one, that the score is about 73, right? So what does it mean? If a neuropsychological assessment is performed and the doctor looks at this, what does it mean? Well, you can see that the score is 1 standard deviation above the mean. You just see the difference in color, right? You can see that it's just one point above, 1 standard deviation from the mean. And the mean is, of course, the light blue line, all right? What does it mean if it's above the mean? It means that this person performs significantly better than peers, statistically better than peers, okay? And so, as I mentioned before, this scale is an assessment of the person's ability to discern, to pick, right, to veto among competing stimuli, the stimulus of the word and the stimulus of the color. Okay? And so, if this happens, it means that the person shows the ability to work efficiently and also pay attention. This is one of the tests we use, for instance, for ADHD, for attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder, right? And so you have different tasks, and low value, if you look at the other ones, low values on the color word score in the presence of normal color and normal word score usually are indicative of interference. Let me repeat what I said. If the person has a normal color response, so the person is able to identify color alone quite well, and the person is able to identify words alone quite well, and in those cases, the result is there, then you will infer that the person is performing better than the average. But if you have normal color, normal words, and those are just on average, and then you see low values of color word scoring combination, then means there's an interference. So color high, color word low, that means it's an interference, right? So let's take a look at what I just said. So you see the color word raw score. So I'm talking about the third one, or the third histogram here. And this is slightly below, right? It's 65. So it's within plus minus 1 SD, 1 standard deviation from the mean. So again, take a look at the blue line there. It's right there, right? Slightly lower than interference, right? So just on a visual look, even if you don't have a lot of interest in biostatistics and mathematics, you can just see visually that it's just slightly low, right? What does it mean that it's slightly low? It's right on the blue line. It means that these persons perform average in comparison to peers, in comparison to the general population. And so that simply means that the person is right there where it's supposed to be. Now, an individual may score relatively high on interference due to normatively poor performance on color or word, okay? But it could also be the opposite, right? It could score poor relative to peers on color or words, or the other way around. Let me just finish. I hope I'm not confusing you here. I'm just using this as an example. Let's go back. Let's talk about the color raw score, so number 2. Okay, so we'll come back number 2. This is even lower. So you see it from the right, it's high, lower, then we go even lower on the color raw score, number 2. What does that mean? Now, this is about 54. So again, within plus minus standard deviation from the mean. What could cause this, right? So it's right there, but it could be significant. And if this is significant, what does it mean? If there's a color raw score that's lower, well, perhaps the person doesn't see well, right? It could be a color vision impairment. Maybe the person is colorblind, right? So if you look at this histogram alone, then you really don't have much information. You cannot say that the person is either confused or anxious or not intelligent just on pure color alone. Maybe the person doesn't see colors, okay? And that's why you need to have all these other stats. So the last one that we need to assess is the word. This is the lowest of them all in this example. Now you can see here, now it's significantly below the blue line. It's 37, right? And so what does it mean here? This part here, because we're talking about words, in general, we assess basic reading speed and whether the person is right there, developmentally speaking, where they're supposed to be. Now, because you read, this also is connected with motor speech abilities. And from a neurological standpoint, that has to do either with the ability to understand what's there or the ability to utter what's there. So if you understand the ability to see what's there, then you might infer there is something to do with Wernicke's area. If it's something to do with speech production, then it's something to do with Broca's area in neurology. But yet again, if you only see the word alone, you could not infer much, right? Because in general, on statistical level, basic reading speed and capacity is reaching near adult levels at about age 12 or so. All right, so this is just an example. I hope things are clear so far. Again, this is not a lecture to teach you how to conduct a neuropsychological test, but it's just a way to infer how things are done. Next slide, please. All right, another one here. I'm not going to spend the same amount of time here, just 2 different comparisons here. Let's start with the right one, first one. This is an example of the WCST, so the Wisconsin card sorting test. So in this test, again, you have you need to ask the patient, the subject, to identify different cards, and you can see here there are different shapes. You have a blue square, you have different triangles. One is green in this case, one is red. Then you have circles or dots. One is green, one is red, and then you identify the ability of the person to either respond in a correct or incorrect way, and then you calculate the error signals. Now you see incongruent condition above, congruent condition below, and then you analyze the performance over time. So that's what the test is about. Also tests that we can use for cognitive processes, for ADHD, and so on and so forth. On the left side, those three histograms, here I compared three different tests. In blue is the control group. You know, in medical studies, we use case control studies. So you have a group of people that should be statistically significant to the one you study, and then you juxtapose that, and you see if there's any outlier. The outlier here in red is people that are diagnosed with autism, and you can see that they perform significantly higher in their values in all these three tests. The first one is the WCST, which is really good in detecting that. You see the significant difference between control group and people with autism. The Stroop test on the right area, which is the one we just discussed, and then the TOL test. I will not spend too much time on the TOL. That is the Tower of London test, which is also a test that monitors executive functioning and analyze deficits in planning, things like that. So what happens is that you give a person two boards with pegs and several beads with different colors, and then you ask to arrange them. So the one board shows the goal arrangement of the beads, and the other board is given to the examinee with the beads in different configuration. So those are very good tests that don't really require specific knowledge. They don't ask questions. You don't have to investigate whether a person understands. It's very much reactive. They're very good tests to understand how well the person performs. Good. Let's move on to the next slide, please. All right. The next one is the MMPI, and it's really the last slide for this presentation. So I hope I have like 5 more minutes. Hopefully I'll try to wrap it up in case there are questions. And this is very interesting, mostly from a philosophical standpoint, because what's happening here? So far, what I showed you are tests that one could say are mathematically consistent. They're tests that do not really infer the ability of a person to react on the basis of culture, education, upbringing, society, things like that. It's mostly reaction time. And they're very good because to some extent, you don't really need to know much about the person to calculate the math. As long as you know how to do the math, then you're all set. And that's precisely because we can infer that all brains are the same. They function in similar ways. So for those tests, animal models are very good. Artificial intelligence, brain-computer interface is very good because the assumption is you just calculate the function, right? If you were to use a materialistic view, all these previous tests consider the brain to be a mechanism, an organ, just as a machine, right? But as I said earlier, if you only have those tests, it's not enough to understand the person. And that's why we have other things such as the MMPI, which stands for Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory. And this is a fascinating test because it helps understand where the person is on those areas. Now, this is a very complex test, and I will not bore you with the details. I want to make sure to have enough time. But this is a test that has many questions, over 570 questions, and assesses different ways to process information. And it's a good test that can be added, for instance, to see if there is any malingering, because it's becoming more common. And I'm not sure how things are in Russia, but definitely in the United States, more and more people, unfortunately, are presenting themselves trying to appear more ill than they are. And in some cases, unfortunately, that is due to young age, a young student might want to have an extension at the university. So if the person receives a diagnosis, let's say of ADHD, then the person has a piece of paper, can tell the professor, hey, I need more time in test. I need an extension, okay? Or in other cases, people just want to take more medications because, for instance, in ADHD, a lot of those medications are stimulants and it gives you a lot of boost and then can create addiction. It's a very tragic situation. And part of it, it's unfortunately the medical the medical system that thinks of medicating pharmacologically people before they talk about them. So that's one of the issues. So the MMPI helps understand whether the person is faking symptoms or not. It's also very good to understand things such as bipolar disorder, whether a person goes from mania to depression. And then, as I mentioned here, the 3 personality disorder. And that's the last thing I mentioned, and I conclude. What is the difference between, let's say, let me pick the red button here, right? The red dot, cluster B. What's the difference between, let's say, borderline personality disorder and bipolar disorder? There are many differences. One can be of intensity and time, okay? In a borderline personality disorder presentation, the person might have strong emotions, so it might fluctuate in mood, very high, very low. Same as in bipolar, but the curve itself, it's much faster. The person might cry and laugh within the same hour with borderline. And instead, in bipolar, we're talking about 4 days followed by, let's say, 2 weeks. So this is one difference. But then the other question is, what makes us who we are? Is a personality something you are born with? So is it innate and predicated on genetics? Or is it something that you learn along the way? The answer to this question, I think we should thank the Greek and go back to the etymology of the word, right? Greek and Romans, and Thracians as well. The term personality really means persona, as you all know. And so it's the mask that ancient actors put on to change the mood, to change the vibe. So I will certainly say this. While we can never say that there is one specific genetic factor that accounts for any mental health disorders, we could say that a person becomes who they are across time in relation to also their environment. So to some extent, from this perspective, both Heidegger were right in terms of time and being, and I would say that even Vygotsky was right in terms of the way we can learn vicariously by example. So I will conclude here by saying that in neuropsychology, one has to be a scientist with strong mathematical, strong neurological skills, but also an artist in the broader sense of the term, and the ability to understand the philosophical background of the person you're treating. So thank you very much.